That's the only change that was made in the Appropriations Committee. Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, should I explain more now, or would you prefer that I wait?
Representative Nelson, if that was the changes you made in the Appropriations Committee, I think we'll call on who's carrying it out of the Policy Committee and then get back to you later if there's more questions. Who's Representative Schatz is carrying it out of the Appropriations Committee, or out of the Policy Committee, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1466 is about the funding for non-public schools. There are several facts about the non-public schools. There are 45 private schools in North Dakota that educate about 7,000 students. The families of these students pay state taxes to support public education. The non-public schools are required to meet state standards by hiring highly qualified teachers. The non-public school courses offering meet state approval just like public schools. Non-public schools are required to meet DPI state approval, and most are accredited by the NCA just like public schools. Non-public schools save public school money and resources as we are partnered with public schools to serve the students who have learning disabilities. Non-public schools ultimately save public school funding in hundreds of thousands of dollars over the students' K-12 education. And non-public schools produce students with high state and ACT test scores and graduation rates. Your support of House Bill 1466 will strengthen the academic offerings of non-public schools, will continue to relieve the burden of increased student population, and will extend non-public schools' contribution to the educational heritage of North Dakota well into the future. Please vote green on House Bill 1466.
Is there any discussion? Representative Jay Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the Assembly. I don't often speak from the North Dakota Constitution in this on the floor, but when I do, I use the unabridged copy. Article 8, Section 1 of the North Dakota Constitution states, "The Legislative Assembly shall make provision for the establishment and maintenance of a system of public schools which shall be open to all children of the state of North Dakota and free from sectarian control." That's what we have today. We have a system of public schools that everybody, every student, every child in the state is welcomed into, whether they're, whatever the case may be, and the public schools accept them. I have no problem. In fact, I've supported numerous times the role of private schools in our society and in this state. But when we come to a voucher system that pays a portion of a state aid payment to private schools, that's going too far. Especially in a situation where we have a number of schools, and we'll see this later today, when with the DPI bill as well as House Bill 1319, a change in the formula for our public education funding across the state. There's a number of schools that do very well in that new funding formula, but there's also a number of them, far too many in my opinion, that get absolutely no increase in payment. Now, consider this. You have a system where you may or may not be in the middle of a contract period with your teachers. You may be looking at increase in TFFR retirement taxes because of negotiated agreements. And you may have increased costs in transportation. There's no new money for many of these schools for these situations. So where's it going to come from? There's only one place in our whole system where this can come from, and that's going to be property tax. We fall over backwards in this chamber trying to provide property tax relief. But how can we do that? How can we go home and say that we're providing property tax relief when there's no increase in dollars in schools' budgets? If that wasn't the case, maybe you could make a case for providing private schools some assistance. I don't think this is the way we should do it if we go into that arena, though, because we have that sectarian rule or law in our Constitution. And I'm not a lawyer, and I don't even play one on TV. But if I did, I would be very careful about this type of funding mechanism for private schools. A tax credit would make much more sense, in my opinion. So, for that reason, and that reason alone, I think we should reject this bill and go with the committee's, the Appropriation Committee's recommendation of a do not pass. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there are a lot of reasons why people choose to go to a private school. I'd like to tell you my story. It'll be brief. When my daughter was in kindergarten, this was before public school kindergarten, on graduation day, her administrator told me that she would be starting school with an LD watch. Now, I had no idea my daughter had any kind of learning disability. I didn't think she did, and I asked why. And she said, well, you must have noticed she doesn't make her M's right. And I said, well, I think that must have been just the day she was tested or something. Can we do a retest? And they said, no, that'll be fine. She'll just start school in first grade with an LD watch on her record and take care of it later. And I said, I don't want that. So I started looking around to see what other options I could have, since I couldn't have her retested before starting school with that label. I found Shiloh Christian School, and we told her at Shiloh Christian because first with the teacher, I said, you tell me what you're going to do with this. And she said, we'll teach her. I found out that she did not have any learning disabilities. She went to school there for 1st through 6th grade. In 7th grade, she went to the public schools because Shiloh was small, didn't have an art program at the time, and she loved art. My daughter now is the elementary art teacher on a volunteer basis at Shiloh. It was a wonderful option for us as a family to be able to have her there. And I really ask you to let that continue for a lot of families, because now the private schools are having to increase their tuition so much just to try to keep up. If they get some help, then they can afford to keep teachers paid at a salary that will help keep quality teachers in their school. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. Our state economy is flourishing more than any other place in the country. What better way to invest in all students than with this bill and free education for all students? Mr. Speaker, if I can continue.
You may continue.
In your House Education Committee, when we heard this bill, we heard testimony from a young lady, and she gave a great testimony. That lady is currently attending a private school in Bismarck. This young lady attended public school for a long, long time, and she was bullied in the public school. She was bullied for many years. Her parents tried to have the conditions changed. They took all the necessary steps. I personally know this because I know her parents. Things did not change, and so she decided to go to a private school here in Bismarck. That young lady is flourishing right now. Her mom is working a second job to pay for her schooling. This is just one example. Just one example. There are many more like hers. Offering choice to our parents is critical. It is the right thing to do. Please vote green.
Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. This bill to me is a pro-taxpayer bill. It's a pro-student bill. Both public and non-public schools have an important role in teaching our children. I've paraphrased a few short sentences from an email from one of my District 37 constituents. Private schools are not a competitor. They are a complement to public schools. They help ease the burden. This funding could help the private schools take in additional students, easing the burden even more on the public school system. And those words are paraphrased out of an email. My words. I think if we take the emotion out of this argument and the fear that former and current school superintendents appear to have on it, and take it from a logical standpoint, this is a pro-taxpayer bill. And ultimately, we need to pass those bills that ultimately save the taxpayers' dollars. The taxpayers pay the bills for those public schools. I urge a green vote.
Representative Rohr.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, I too rise in support of House Bill 1446. Based on the more than 300 emails I have received from parents and grandparents across the state of North Dakota, it is time that we as legislators partner with DPI and private institutions to work out the logistics of this concept. Our North Dakota citizens, our taxpayers, are asking that a portion of their tax dollars go towards educating their children and grandchildren at the school that is the best fit, the best learning environment for their individual child, whether public or non-public. Our grandparents and parents are sending us a message, and it is time that we listen. I ask for a green vote on House Bill 1466.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Dosch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly. We've heard a lot of rhetoric about this bill, some things that are true and some that aren't, and I would like to set the record straight. First, let's talk about the constitutional issues. Our Constitution does clearly state that no money raised for the support of public schools will be used for the support of sectarian schools. This means property taxes or funds from the Common Schools Trust Fund cannot be used. This bill does not use any of those funds. It uses general fund dollars, not state aid dollars that we heard. It uses general fund dollars. This does not violate any of the provisions of the Constitution. And furthermore, it does not take a single cent away from our local school districts. It is not part of the education formula, and therefore it does not take away any money from our local school districts. Next, one of the discussions is the separation of church and state. It's kind of interesting because we start this session each day with a prayer. Imagine that. We say the Pledge of Allegiance, which includes the words, "One nation under God." Imagine that. If you work for the federal or state government, guess what? You get paid holidays, religious holidays off. Paid, I might add. The fact of the matter is that school choice or a school voucher program, whatever you want to call it, the courts have ruled that as long as it is not designated to aid any one particular religion and is open to all students, that has never been struck down and has been determined to be constitutional. There's a few other comments. That non-public schools don't follow all the same rules as a public school. Well, the fact of the matter is non-public schools are required, as we heard, to hire all highly qualified teachers. All school courses and offerings must meet state approval. All schools participating in this program must meet DPI standards and be an accredited institution. As far as accountability, nowhere can it be said that there's more educational accountability than it is in our non-public schools, where no one is forced to attend, where parents must pay dearly to have their kids attend. That, ladies and gentlemen, is accountability, when people are reaching into their own pockets. And next we always hear the argument about special needs, that the non-public schools don't take in special needs students. Well, that is simply false. I'd like to share with you an email that I received. And it said, my son, Kademan, went through kindergarten twice at 2 different schools. And at both, after the first few days, he hid and cried and didn't want to return. First grade was even worse. For 3 years, Kademan feared and hated school. And these were to be his enjoyable years. Kademan has a neurological disorder. It affects everything from his tolerance to pain to his concentration and social issues. His world is one where fight or flight is a way of life. Because of his disability is not on the list of serviceable disorders, he did not qualify for educational adjustment. He is in that other category. And since Kademan was not failing school, he didn't qualify. A special education staff urged me to fill out a diagnosis form in such a way that he would be qualified for ADD or ADHD or anything else that was on the list, so that they could offer him some services, or the parent could simply wait until he fell behind. I love my son, and therefore these were not options for me. I will not allow him to fall through the cracks. A private school offered me a solution. They wouldn't be able to provide all of the services that a public school could, but they could do whatever they could do. Kademan entered the 2nd grade at this private school with the same fear, but within a short time, he told his mom she can go home. And now in the 6th grade, he's loved every day of school. It's a joy he doesn't want to miss. Shouldn't every child have this opportunity to see school as a place of joy and learning? This is the great thing about private schools. They are flexible, warm, and loving places. Every child is different. A public education isn't always the right option. I am a single parent. I struggle just to keep our heads above water. I often have to go to food pantries just to feed us. But I would give up my home and my vehicle to make sure that Kademan got to stay in this amazing school. Please support Kademan and all the other students and children for whom public school isn't quite the right fit. And this is just one of many. And I want to thank Kademan, who's here today, because he puts a face on this argument. It's not about money, it's not about control, it should be about kids. That's what we should be talking about today. You know, one other comment I would like to bring up, and finally, the one that many of us like to also use against the non-public schools is that, you know what, it is a choice for parents, whether they want to send them there or not. But the reality is the ever-increasing cost of education and the fact that this state does not provide assistance or tax credit to non-public schools. The tuition is expensive, and thus to many low and moderate income families, they simply can't afford tuition, and therefore in North Dakota, they do not have a choice in education. And this is exactly why this bill is needed. Perhaps it was best said last week by a member of this very own chamber, a member actually across the aisle, when we were discussing an extra $200 that legislators want for extra travel. And the quote that was said, and I quote, "We want to make sure that serving in the North Dakota legislature is not reserved only for the wealthy," unquote. Well, don't you think the same consideration should be given when it comes to the education of our children? And that education choice should not only be for those wealthy and those that can afford it? I would also like to talk about that was discussed, how do we pay for this? It has a $32 million fiscal note. Well, you've all received a little chart that we handed out this morning. And all we need is simply 2,020 kids, 2% of our current population, to either move from public to non-public, or the biggest thing in our communities is K through 6 right now. The oil boom has brought in young families into our communities.
Representative Dosch, 1 minute.
Take a look. Take a look. This will pay for itself by just converting 2,000 people, 2,000 kids, and it will pay for all the 6,000 to 7,000 kids now in the system. I think the best analogy that was made to me, and I'll make this short, Mr. Speaker, said, you know, Mr. Dosch, public school is kind of like your suit. And I said, like my suit? He said, yeah, it's a nice suit, looks good on you, it fits you good. But what if everyone in this chamber had to wear this exact same suit? It would fit a lot of us, but some of us, even though it's a nice suit, wouldn't quite fit us too well. Right, Representative Delzer? But that's the importance of education choice. Our public schools are great, don't get me wrong.
Representative Dosch, your time is up.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I will yield. Thank you, and I ask for your consideration. Just remember the kids. That's what this should all be about. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Rust.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly, make no mistake about it. Even though this is permissive, this is a major, major policy shift for the state of North Dakota, as it provides state dollars going to another system of educating students. North Dakota's Constitution states that he shall provide provision for the establishment and maintenance of a system of public schools, which shall be open to all children of the state and free from sectarian control. This bill will provide dollars to private schools who can and do discriminate on the basis of religion, due process, special needs, and a number of other ways. In committee testimony, when we were informed that non-public schools usually do not have the resources or personnel to educate special needs children, and therefore the vast majority of them go to the public schools. When asked if private schools must afford students and teachers due process, the answer was no. I went to the website of one of the private schools in this area. Their admission policy requires a pastor's recommendation from their church, a confidential recommendation from a friend, preferably from a past or present member of the school's family, a parent interview, and a possible interview with the child if in grades 7 through 12. Public schools must accept anybody and everybody, no questions asked. This bill would have the state providing dollars for two separate but unequal systems. I believe it's totally contrary to what the drafters of the Constitution intended. We would not do that with our system of public roads. We would not use state dollars to pay for the private roads, even if those roads took vehicles off the public roads and thereby saved taxpayer dollars through less maintenance and upkeep. I have a further concern with the language in that it says 25% of the school district's educational cost per student. As the dollars paid to the private school will vary greatly with the home district. For example, we have students that go from long distances to private schools, and if a student from Twin Buttes of Halliday went to, say, a private school in Dickinson, the payment of that private school would be Twin Buttes educational cost per student, which is $38,296 divided by 4, so the payment would be $9,574. A student from Medora to Dickinson would be Medora's educational cost per student of $29,766 divided by 4, or $7,442. I believe the state should not hinder parents from home educating their children or from placing them in a controlled religious-based environment. They certainly should have and do have that choice. In fact, as a former school administrator, those parents that choose to send their children to private schools are exactly the ones that I would want in the public school, because they are very much involved with their children, and we all know that one of the greatest guarantees of children doing well in school is if their parents are involved with their educational process. However, the state should not pay for a dual system where one has to operate under different rules. State dollars should go to the public schools, which are open to all children, free from sectarian control. I'm also not sure that the private schools understand the possible implications of receiving state dollars. Will the courts hold them to the same standards as the public schools? Maybe not immediately, but down the road, I believe they will. The state of North Dakota has long held that public education dollars should not go to private causes. That is good policy. I urge you not to go down this separate but unequal road. Please vote red. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Nathy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to shed a little light on some of our conversations in the Education Committee. And a lot of it you've all heard today, and we had a lot of debate on it. And, the remark just made by my friend from District 2 said this is a big change. And there's no doubt about it. This is a huge policy change. But the state of North Dakota is going through big changes. And we need to take a look at that and keep that in mind. In 2009, I voted against a similar bill. And some people in this body were quite surprised because my kids go to private school. But the environment at the time was not conducive for that idea. We were looking at declining enrollments, consolidating schools. It was not right. But now is the right time. We're looking at increasing enrollments for many years to come. Bismarck Public Schools just passed a bond to build 2 schools. They're going to be open in a year or so. The day they're open at 110% capacity. No room. A lot of our discussion in the committee was this bill is looked at as trying to help these schools with their overpopulation. I was part of a tour last summer of the oil fields. We talked to many educators, talked to people here. Their comments were, give us some help, give us some tools. We can hire teachers. We have no room to place teachers. We have no place for our kids. The schools are overcrowded. The portables are overcrowded. Kids are being taught under stairwells. This bill is one of those tools that can help them. And when it comes time, I find it very interesting. Most of the emails I have against this bill are from school administrators. Very, and I mean very few from the public. A lot of support from the public for this bill. So when it comes down to voting for this bill, think about it. Are we doing what's right for K-12 education for the institution? Or are we going to do what's right and what's best for the kid. When there is open seats across town, teachers available across town, let's give these students a chance, an incentive to be taught in a normal classroom setting and not in an overpopulated classroom. Thank you.
Representative Fair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Schatz, the bill carrier, yield to a question?
Representative Schatz, would you yield to a question?
I would, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Fair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schatz, currently private schools are not required to comply with state law for Family Education and Rights and Privacy Act, No Child Left Behind, Continuous Improvement Process. My question is this. Under the bill, it says that the school district, and with the amendment, says may contract with the approved non-public school for provision of educational services to the child. My question is, can the public school include requirements or provisions, or can they pass on some of those regulations if they choose to?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Fair, did you say can the public school do that, or do you mean the private school?
Can the public school in the contract pass on some of those regulations? Can they put contingencies into the contract?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Fair, that's one of those things I do not know.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Maragos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Education Chairman, Representative Nathy, stand for a question?
Representative Nathy, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Representative Maragos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nathy, was there any discussion about the idea of maybe putting in a constitutional resolution to allow the people of North Dakota to maybe remove the prohibition to sectarian involvement in your committee?
Mr. Speaker, Representative Maragos, there was not. No, the discussion just centered on the bill and on the effects of the bill.
Thank you, Representative Nathy. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I agree with a lot of the comments made here, especially by Representative Nathy, in that the state is going through a lot of changes. So maybe it's time that we put this question to the people of North Dakota and let them decide whether we should be able to fund two separate systems. I just would like you all to think about that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative D. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the bill carrier yield to a question, please?
Representative Schatz, would you yield to another question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schatz, when public education money follows the students on border towns, use example of Grand Forks, one of these towns where we've got public schools and the students want to go to a private school in East Grand Forks. Is this North Dakota money going to follow that student?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, no, I don't believe it would.
May I continue?
You may continue, Representative Johnson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that we could take a recommendation of the Appropriations Committee on do not pass on this bill. I can certainly understand where the private schools are coming from, but not all parts of the state have this rapid increasing number of students. We come from a part of the state where we've got declining enrollment, and we've certainly got room in our public schools and trying to fund these public schools, and with the funding formula we got, I think we'd like to keep that money going to our public schools. Please ask for a red vote on this.
Is there further discussion? Representative Dosch, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. Just to answer a couple questions that were brought up. That is about areas with declining enrollment. This is a permissive bill. It says each school district may contract. So if you live in one of those areas where the public school would be adversely affected, you don't have to. They don't have to do this. The other thing that we heard about today and the whole frustration with the education system is a lot about money and a lot about bureaucracy. Well, how about results? They don't want to talk about results too often, but we should talk about those. I'd like to share with you an email that I received from a public school teacher. And it says, our public schools are full and taking in new students each day. Our communities are stronger with the diversity of what is offered by both public and private schools. I witness each day these two school systems supporting each other and challenging each other to make them both stronger. Private schools are a part of our North Dakota culture, and we need to make a commitment to support them. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, we've heard a lot of things. We've heard about overcrowding in our schools, a rapid enrollment. This bill takes care of that. We heard about increasing education costs to the state. This bill takes care of it. A kid that goes to non-public schools, the state saves 75% of the cost of that education for each one of these kids. We heard about increasing property taxes. Well, Representative Nathy was exactly right. Why do we continue to build more schools and more brick and mortar when perhaps if we use the capacity in our non-public school systems, we wouldn't have to build new schools and therefore we wouldn't have to increase property taxes? And let's talk about competency. Right now in North Dakota, 1 out of every 4 of our kids need remedial education. Study after study has shown that in every state where a voucher program or school choice program has been implemented, in every state, test scores and competency of students increased not only in the private schools, but the non-public schools as well. When there's friendly competition, when you have two healthy systems in the state, it's good for all the kids in the state. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I know that many of you are struggling with this vote, and I certainly can respect that. You're uncertain as to which way to go, and I understand that as well. But you know the old saying, and that is, if I'm going to err, I want to err on the side of caution. Well, if I'm going to err in regards to education, I will always err on the side of the parent and the child. Because I believe that choice is best placed in the hands of our moms and dads and not the government. Please join with me. Let's take that leap of faith. Those hundreds of emails that you have been getting, they're from parents, real people and parents. I know that you've heard them. I know that you understand their challenges, their concerns, and their desire to simply do what's best for their children. And now it's our chance here. It's our chance to put the choice back into the hands of our parents. I urge you a green vote. Thank you.
Representative Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may for a minute, there's been a lot of conversation about the ability of the private schools to have a higher quality of education, and I commend them in that respect. But also, having been involved with the preschool aspect of it and preparing children for schools in my particular profession for almost 14 years, we had a lot of people coming to Grand Forks and in our surrounding area because of our school district. Our school district is able to provide everything that has been mentioned in this particular conversation, except the religious aspect of it. Also, we take a number of people that are refugees that are required by the federal government to come to our schools, and we're required to educate those particular students as well. We do between 35 and 40 different languages right now and teach those kids. Those particular kids come out of our particular schools with a very fine education and the ability to be a very productive and tax-paying citizen. I think if we take a look at all of the aspects, I don't know if this particular law actually addresses, if you look at 15.127 and 15.120, it does not exempt the private schools from all the requirements of the public schools. So I think we'll wind up in some type of litigation at that point in time. Also, if we take a look at this, there are going to be relationships between the private and the public schools in some particular lawsuits that would take place. as far as actions that are taken by either the state or the private schools. Also, we haven't mentioned the open meetings records yet that are required, that private schools are not required to do. So we do not have the transparency of where the money is being allocated and where it's going to make sure that it will be spent on the right policies and programs. Also, we take into consideration with the requirements for the teachers and the administrators non-renewable process that hasn't been considered yet. So all of those things have not been worked out. I think this bill is premature, and I think that our public schools are not the same as Representative completely mentioned earlier, that we do not have the same problem in the eastern part of the state as the western part of the state, and so one shoe does not fit all again. I would ask that we uphold the appropriations recommendation and vote a do not pass.
Representative Nathy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to make clear about the new language. This bill does not force the school districts to do this. This new language gives them the option to do it. So we're not forcing the districts to do this. It just gives them the opportunity to do it. The other thing about the schools in the east, Fargo, West Fargo, are growing leaps and bounds. There is growth out east, not just west. So there are school districts that are growing like mad, and there are open seats in these private schools. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Jay Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Assembly, I served on a school board for 12 years, and I wouldn't want to be on that school board when a parent comes in and the school board denies that request for that parent to send their student to a private school. That would be very disruptive if they said, no, I've gone through a number of annexation hearings and they're not fun, I can guarantee you. But let's get this back on track. State legislature, we develop policy. $32,600,000 from the general fund is what this is going to cost to do that, if we pass this bill. That is, now you can skirt the issue that it meets all the constitutional provisions that you want, but this is general fund money. That general fund money does go into our public school education, and it's been stated that, you know, I have no problem with the public schools. They do a good job, but our public schools do a very good job. No buts. They provide every student in North Dakota a quality education. That there should not be a but to that sentence. We sit here and we talk, you know, we try, or we should try, I think, to provide a consistent product in this chamber. I'd like to compare this bill to an issue we had earlier in the session. A bill that would have provided school lunch milk to students on a break. Our public schools are much, and I was just reading a letter to the editor that our education chair had published yesterday, and I agree with him. Our public school system is like the product that we provide. The school lunch program. Students get milk in the morning. They get milk at lunch. It exceeds the nutritional requirement for their needs. The milk break issue that we had, and this body overwhelmingly said no to providing a subsidy for a milk break. That's same analogy could be made in this case, where the private schools come in and they want their milk break. We said no in that case. We said let them pay if they want the milk. I would say the same thing here. If they want private education, let them pay.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Larson, second time.
I just want to say that I think that the public schools do an excellent job. Flat out, they do. I also think it's good to have some families have choice, because for them, it is a better option for them and their family. Not because the public school doesn't do a good job. They do. They do an excellent job. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1466. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed and clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 31 yeas, 63 nays, 0 absent, not voting. House Bill 1466 is declared failed. I know